I am an African.
Welcome to the Africa for Dummies podcast. Unfortunately, starting this podcast on a sad note. For those who do not know, Zambia's sixth president, Edgar Chagwa Lungu, passed away on June 5th, 2025. His death marks not only the loss of a former head of state, but the departure of an active political player at a fragile moment of Zambia's democracy. So today we're just going to discuss his life, his legacy, and maybe a little bit about Zambia's political crossroads before the election that's going to be taking place in 2026. As usual, I am joined by co-host Zenge, and today we're going to be discussing that. Zenge, how you do? I don't even know if I can say how you're doing, but I guess you can take it away.
Yeah, I'm doing all right. Crazy scenes happening in Zambia with regards to the politics. A lot has happened in the last, let's say, 7 days or so.
Mm-hmm.
There's obviously the death of the sixth president of the Republic of Zambia. He's got a strong support base, loyal supporters, but then he's also got a lot of critics as well. He did lose an election with the largest margin since 1996 in 2021. And so Edgar Lungu was president of Zambia from 2015 January up to 2021. So for many people, it's recent history. And when we say former president, he was still very active in politics. He died an active politician. So it does have political implications. And so I think that's what I can say. It's a lot of stuff going on. There's probably going to be quite a vacuum and a tussle for power as the most recognizable opposition figure. So Lungu in active politics after the presidency came back into politics in 2023 and decided to be probably the most recognizable opponent to President Hakainde Hichilema, who has been president since 2021.
As we mentioned, we're going to be discussing Edgar Lungu's legacy, looking at the infrastructure, the crises, and controversy. And in this episode, as you would expect, I think, Zenge, you have a lot more knowledge than I do. I lived under Edgar Lungu for a bit there. So we're going to look at, of course, starting with his unexpected rise to becoming Zambia's president. For those who know or maybe have forgotten or are unaware, but a lot of people back in those times, you wouldn't have had expected that President Lungu would have been the selected president after Michael Sata's death. His coming into power was very unexpected. I believe he was the former minister of prisons or correction.
Former minister of justice.
Former minister of justice.
Former minister of home affairs. Yeah.
Then home affairs, but did you have former minister of justice? And then he eventually became the president after Michael Sata had passed.
Also served as Minister of Defense at one point. He rose really quickly.
That's very true. But yeah, as I was saying, a lot of people wouldn't have expected that President Edgar Lungu would become president. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so Edgar Lungu was a law student. He became a lawyer. He studied at the University of Zambia. Fun fact, the University of Zambia, locally known as UNZA, or Yunza, he has actually produced 3 presidents. 4 now, I think. So Mwanawasa, Zambia state president; Edgar Lungu, Zambia 6th president; Emerson Mnangagwa, president of Zimbabwe; and Hakainde Hichilema, president of Zambia right now. Anyway, Lungu was a law student, and he was born in Kitwe, I think. In Kitwe or Ndola? In Kitwe, yeah. Mm-hmm. And no, actually, he was born in Ndola, sorry. And he was a lawyer for one of the mining companies at that time. So all of the action just used to happen in the mining industry. And then in the early 1990s, he decided to join the United Party for National Development, at that time one of the major opposition parties, and at that time led by a guy called Anderson Mazoka. And
interesting. I actually didn't know that.
Yeah, so he was actually in the UPND. That was his first political party. But he stood in 2001, I think, under UPND banner. And then in 2006, by 2006, he had joined the Patriotic Front, which was this emerging urban party with a very strong popularity increasing in the Copperbelt. And that was led under Michael Sata. So he stood in 2006 and he won the Chawama seat, which is a major constituency in Lusaka, Zambia's capital. And so since then, he had been member of parliament for Chawama. And he was very much an unknown figure, to be honest. Even when people spoke of opposition bigwigs before the Patriotic Front, which was Lungu's party and the ruling party of Zambia from 2011 to 2021, Lungu's name really didn't come up, So fast forward 2011, Michael Sata, the leader of this emerging party, Patriotic Front, comes into power. They win an election. They defeat the president of Zambia at that time, Rupia Banda, of the Movement for Multi-Party Democracy, ending 20 years of the Movement for Multi-Party Democracy's reign. Michael Sata comes in, this firebrand, no nonsense, no political correctness type of guy who, the man of action, that was the quote. And Lungu is appointed deputy minister in the vice president's office. This does not mean he's deputy vice president. Zambia does not have a deputy vice president. He's basically an admin guy that deals with that minister, and that department deals with disaster mitigation management. So if there's a flood, if there's an earthquake, if those are the things you'd respond to. So he was not really on the political scene per se, to be honest, aside from being in parliament. When I first saw him, I saw him running. I think there was a landslide somewhere in Zambia, and I saw him on news, and I was saying, who's this guy? And he liked jogging. So I was saying, this guy looks fun, So yeah, no, he wasn't really someone to look out for in 2011 when the PF won. But in the 3 years that Michael Sata was president of Zambia, he increasingly positioned himself as this sort of like reliable, non-controversial, steady hands, right? So as stalwarts, party stalwarts who almost felt they should inherit the party, and Michael Sata was increasingly becoming ill, increased rumors of him being ill and potentially dying, which he eventually did in October 2014. Many of the stalwarts were sort of fighting each other. Winter Kavimba was the Secretary General of the Patriotic Front, was fighting Geoffrey Waliamwamba, GBM, who was the Minister of Defense from 2011, right? And Winter Kavimba was also Minister of Justice. And, they all had pronouncements and spoke beyond their portfolios. You think that a Minister of Justice wouldn't be talking about everyday politics or language in schools. Winter Kavimba talked about all of this stuff, So he had a very big portfolio and felt sort of entitled to talk about everything because he might be the next president. And GBM, same issue. And they all had their own supporters. In Zambia, they're known as cadres, which basically means sort of sycophant, fanatic supporters who would do anything for you, like they would break a car if they have to break a car, if it's Team Nathan and Nathan's like, yeah, slap Zenge. And then they'll be like, yeah, let's do this, slap Zenge. But, so increasingly Lungu was just a quiet, steady hand, very humble, the humble leader. That was really what sold him. And Michael Sata, as he was sort of getting more and more ill in 2023, piled a lot of big portfolios on him. So all of a sudden, this almost obscure deputy minister became Home Affairs Minister, became Justice Minister, and then became Defense Minister. I think he held two portfolios at one point, both defense and justice for a while. And at that time, they had this strange way of running. The vice president was white, Guy Scott, born in Zambia, but
think his dad was a
constitutional
freedom
requirements for
fighter, if I'm not
Zambia.
mistaken.
Yeah, his dad was a freedom fighter. He was like a sort of white rebel, anti-colonial guy, and he was actually in the colonial parliament, but he was like anti, white. Yeah, but anyway, so Guy Scott, Michael Sada's left-hand guy or right-hand guy, yeah, that's the term, was vice president, but when it came to being president, and whenever Michael Sada left the country, they always chose someone else to act as president because the qualifications for being president at that time were different to the qualifications of being vice president. That time there was still.
So, do you think, I don't know if I should mention this because we're talking about, I don't want to take it away from Edgar Lungu, although I do believe that Guy Scott did fit the requirements to become acting president, but people...
Yeah, that was the front that they...
I do think that people in... My assumption is that people within the political party were afraid of Guy Scott because they couldn't use Scott. So they, unfortunate opinion, used very racist rhetoric against him to essentially remove or bar him from being president, essentially.
The next president, yeah. Actually, it so the main line was that he didn't have the qualifications, but obviously at the same time, the qualifications for vice president and president were quite different. So there's a lot of as Nathan said, politics around that. So whenever Michael Sada used to leave, they'll designate someone else to be acting president. They had this term acting president, which I always found strange. And sometimes people still use it now, even though the qualifications are the same, the constitution was amended. Anyway, so mid-2023, Sata is almost not seen. It's increasingly becoming ill. People, there's even rumors that he's dead,
At the time, he was running through Facebook. Or somebody.
People only saw photos from Facebook that couldn't be authenticated, and so it's Lungu was increasingly becoming this figure that everyone now knew. He was becoming increasingly a household name, but he still wasn't too controversial.
Yeah, because I was about to say, I don't know,
people knew him on news, Home Affairs Minister Edgar Lungu, but he wasn't.
I think the time I
people
started
didn't have
to
the
get to know
political
him,
opinion of him.
I think the time I started to get to know him was when I think there was a group of prisoners that made a painting for him or something. Like they did a painting for him, and I was like, "Who's this guy?" I think it was Minister of Defense or Minister of Justice. I assume Justice. And I can't remember which prison it was, but they basically made a painting for him. And
maybe when he was home,
I found it hilarious, but yeah.
Wait, was the painting good? Or was it just like a disaster?
I can't remember. It was just really interesting to me that was like news, prisoners had made a painting for a minister. And...
It's like, why are they making a big fuss about this guy? But
yeah.
So mid 2023. There's so many rumors around Michael Sata's health. Sata is about to die, and there's increasing questions about the authenticity of the government cover-up over Michael Sata's health. Anyway, Zambia in 2014 turns 50, right? And in October the 24th, 2014, Zambia turns 50. It is the Jubilee year, and Michael Sata is nowhere to be seen. The week before, I think a few days before Independence Day, the government finally says that he went for a checkup to the United Kingdom, small checkup, and then so basically you have a situation where Lungu is now made acting president in that same strange arrangement. Not Guy Scott, but Lungu is made acting president, and on the 50th anniversary of Zambia's independence, you have Edgar Lungu, and that's when I feel he wore this Chitenge outfit, traditional fabric, trying to almost emulate Kaunda, and he had a stick, and there was I remember the celebrations, the Hero Stadium, when watching it was very nice actually, choreographed, children dancing and forming the numbers, and then the pictures of all the presidents and history from all the way from traditional leadership up to colonialism and so on. It was a really cool exhibition. Right. But Lungu was the presiding guy at that time, he was shaking hands. He was
would you say that
presenting...
You say that skipping Guy Scott was constitutional?
could I say skipping Guy Scott was constitutional?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
No,
I don't know, to be honest. It's very...
I need you to let me know.
I don't see why he
Maybe I'm
wasn't.
saying things shouldn't be said. Right? You let me know. I don't know.
No, I mean, I don't see why I don't, maybe unless I've missed something in the Constitution, he was qualified to be vice president. But
I thought the
not
rules
like
stated.
elected president. That was,
okay.
that
I thought
but
the
even
rules.
that,
I had thought that the rules stated that once you're like vice president, you're like, if something was to happen to the president, then you become like, yeah. But anyways,
yeah,
you
that's
go
the
ahead.
thing.
Sorry for
That's the difficulty, because
Yeah.
when you have different qualifications for a vice president and a president, then you're almost implying that you can just be a vice president and never be a president. But the idea of a vice president is that you are a spare, right? You are
Yeah.
supposed to replace the president in the event
Right.
that that president is not able to execute his duties.
Right.
So it was very strange. So in Zambia, the reason Guy Scott was barred was because the constitution at that time required both parents to be born in Zambia.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Guy Scott's
Fairs,
parents
fairs.
were not born in Zambia,
Yeah.
although Guy Scott was born in Zambia. And
Yeah.
funny enough, that law was also a result of pettiness. Chiluba put it to avoid the first president, funny enough, who founded Zambia from participating in an election.
Yeah.
Because the first president of Zambia's parents were from Malawi, today Malawi. Imaginary borders, but whatever.
Yeah.
Malawi. So anyway, Lungu is presented to Zambia as the presiding officer of our 50th independence. Big names. There was even a special currency, currency limited edition of the kwacha.
Yes,
with
I remember. I
presidents.
remember that.
Yeah.
Yes, that was
Yeah.
really cool. Really
You know,
nice.
I need to, if anyone has it, by the way, if anyone is listening from Zambia, and if you have this, please, I'm willing to buy it right now. I'm collecting.
Especially now, because like they've got new currency notes. I don't know, but anyways, yeah.
Anyway, so October the 24th, Zambia celebrates independence celebrations and so on, despite the president not being there. 28th, it is announced by Guy Scott this time that Michael Sata has died. The founding president of the Patriotic Front, this firebrand leader who jolted them into power, has died. So now leadership wrangle ensues. Guy Scott, the power basically just moves to Guy Scott. Strangely, even though all the time he was never allowed to act as president, now it's official that he is the acting president of Zambia. So anyway, Zambia now gets its official first white interim, albeit interim, president, Guy Lindsay Scott. And basically all military chiefs go to his house. It's official now, like everyone is behind him, except those who are doubting in the PF that didn't like him, just basically shut up and just like, okay, fine, Guy Scott is there. And then there's a bit of a wrangle. Lungu is also, by the way, in the ruling party, the Secretary General, which is a very powerful position, right? And so Lungu is quiet. Many people come up and say, position themselves for president. Michael Sata's nephew, Mao Sampa, comes, I want to be president. At one point, given Luvinda, that time Minister of Information, Agriculture type of, also said he wants to be president. Chishimbaga Mbwili, Minister of Information, very loud.
I forgot
very
that
loud.
Luvinda was president.
Yeah,
was
very
like
loud
president. Yeah.
member of parliament for a constituency in the Copperbelt. Very loud said, I also want to be president. So many people came up and, they fielded themselves to be president. I don't even know the list. There's probably more than like 8 candidates who, in the PF alone, right? So at that time in Zambia, once a president dies, within 90 days, you're supposed to have a new constitution. Sorry, not a new constitution. A by-election.
Yeah.
An election for president, a by-election for president of Zambia.
Yeah.
So for those, by-election is a single election in extraordinary times, and then a general election is like, all of the 3, like president, parliament, ward. So just in case. So anyway, so Guy Scott is now vice president president of Zambia, for 90 days from October up to January. And within that time, there should have been an election and we should know who the president is. And at that time, there was no sort of room for petitioning, right? The constitution, whenever there was a president elected, you could basically be president tomorrow or in 3 minutes, do the inauguration, swear in, done. So, when they say 90 days, it means 90 days. Like he won't be like, he'll be president-elect for the few minutes or hours, whatever you like, until he's sworn in, right? So January, thorough election happens. The UPND, which came third in the 2011 election, suddenly becomes this formidable sort of government in waiting, because they seem to look much more stable than the PF that was fighting for the last 3 months. And they also capitalize on Lungu's inability to spell out a manifesto. I mean, obviously, it's an extraordinary election. So at the same time, in his defense, he wasn't necessarily prepared for this election. So he came on the mantle of obviously a sympathy vote, continuity, that he is the heir apparent of Michael Sata, right? Because he was acting president at the time Michael Sata died. So he's in a good position to start claiming and saying, oh, no, actually. And, I always liken this to the rise of, and I'm going to go nerdy now, I liken this to the rise of Stalin. Yeah, the most cynical view of me, I liken it to Stalin's rise, because the father of...
goes. Yeah.
Look, listen. The father of the Soviet Union was Lenin, right? Yeah. Okay, fine, there was no war, just remove all the blood and stuff. But the Soviet Union was Lenin. And then the father of Stalin was like this, almost not very visionary, not very articulate, not really, I wouldn't say he was insignificant, but he wasn't the most important person, he wasn't the most important person. But then in his rise, he got these boring jobs like Secretary General. And then he was able to position himself on the funeral as the main, chief mourner, the heir apparent, when people like Trotsky, who were the loud ones, who were the intellectual ones, socialist international type of people, like who bring socialism to the whole world, he had big ideas, were not to be seen. I mean, Stalin used trickery. He basically said, oh, the funeral is today, but actually it was another day. Like, he just gave him the wrong dates for the funeral. And that's the power of being Secretary General, because you can do all of this scheduling stuff and just make people look bad. And it was like, oh, why didn't you go to the funeral? I was like, oh, no, I thought it was the other day. It's like, right. How could you not know when this funeral was? You know what I mean? And then slowly, Stalin started kicking out other opponents by making friends. And then after making friends with like one guy, and then both of you working to remove the other guy, and then you remove that same guy who helped you remove the other guy.
Okay.
I'm not going to mention names because I'll be going too deep into that stuff. So eventually, he consolidated his power. So to me, the way I see Lungu, it's not exactly the same, but it is also a game of underestimation and just being quiet. And also positioning himself at the right time. Lungu made a speech on Michael Sata's funeral, and he cried, and everyone in the audience cried with him. So essentially, it was baptizing him as the heir apparent. When people underestimate that posturing, especially in a country that's traditional like Zambia, being a chief monarch has political implications. Anyway, Lungu becomes president in January, and then, and Lungu becomes president at a very difficult time. He wins with just under 2% of the vote, like about 20,000 votes. University of Zambia has more students than the voting gap between the UPND's candidate, Hakainde Hichilema, and Edgar Lungu in the 2015 election. So it's a very thin margin.
Yeah, I didn't remember it being that thin. That's crazy. Okay.
I think about 18,000 people. That was the difference between HH and Edgar Lungu.
Right.
That was the difference, So, it was a very difficult election. The UPND felt there was a lot of malpractice. But also the PF also is famous for music, and they had Kolopa.com at that time, which was a big banger. Kolopa basically means to
mop the floor.
Yeah, and the symbol was to mop up the corruption.
Yeah.
So anyway, Lungu becomes president, and
oddly, PF's was a boat. So.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's funny. Actually.
That's actually odd. Yeah. Poetic. Yeah. Anyways.
Yeah. So he becomes president. To be honest, he's because he has such a strong opposition. It's very the opposition is extremely critical. They mocked the fact that he didn't have any vision, as I said before. They said, "Oh, this guy has no vision." They said, "Chakolwa." They called him a drunkard. I mean, no one can really verify whether or not he was a drunkard.
No, I was going to say that I'm wrong, but I believe he said that too, right?
Lungu said that himself?
I don't know. Okay, it can be verified. Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Anyways, there are lots of rumors, but anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, but I mean, he was not smooth sailing. I don't think there was even a honeymoon, to be honest. And then he also collapsed in March, very memorably. He collapsed. I think he ran out of breath or something. But that was the first time we heard of his sickness. Yeah, so imagine how strange it was. Your president died less than 6 months ago, then the new one you have replaced collapses. So he had achalasia, which is what he actually died of last week. Achalasia is a throat-related illness. I don't know if it's throat cancer but a throat-related illness, definitely. So Lungu becomes president, and so essentially he's president from 2015 to 2016. That's the next general election. So for 18 months, he has 18 months to prove to the people of Zambia.
To cut you off, I just found the article that I was talking about. So you see, this is the interesting thing about rumors, eh? So there was truth to it, but that wasn't the entire quote. So this is from News Diggers in 2018. He said, yes, somebody was saying Lungu has no vision. I said, yes, I have no vision, but collectively we have a vision because you, the people, are the ones who know what the government should do for you. So that's really interesting. I bought into the... Okay, that's really cool.
Okay, that's an interesting framing. Yeah. But yeah, to your opponents, that just means you have no ideas.
Right.
That was the spin. That was
the spin that they did. So that's really creative.
Yeah. So essentially, in those 18 months, from January 2015 up to August 2016, the next election, Lungu presided over the El Nino drought. So essentially, there was a big drought in Zambia, and Zambia is more than 70% reliant on hydroelectricity. So when there's a drought, there are lower water levels, and as a result, our main generators of electricity,
the Kariba Dam.
Yeah. So the Kariba Dam is one of our biggest.
Not only to mention that Zambia agriculture system depends heavily on rain-fed agriculture. So
so Zambia suffered immensely because it not only affected the agriculture, as you said, but it also affected the electricity generation capacity. Load shedding became very common. And I think it was like 4-8 hours. I think I saw a documentary the other day on Lungu, and they were talking about 4-8 hours. And in that documentary, ZNBC, by the way, state TV, and that documentary was done when Lungu was president. Lungu did open a few coal mines to sort of arrest the issue, but most people didn't feel like that made a huge difference. And then also in those 18 months, there was a rapid inflation. And there was also a decline in copper prices. More than 70% of Zambia's exports are copper. Yeah, with the second largest producer of copper in Africa, and I think 7th or 6th in the world. Which is critical to sort of energy transition and electric vehicles and those things. So Zambia's economy thrives on the capacity for copper to sell at good prices. And that time the prices weren't doing well.
About 7% of the government.
So basically Lungu's taxes. Lungu's economic status was not helping, and the borrowing still increased, right? There were still more loans, new loans. So in Lungu's first term, just 18 months in power, he sort of accelerated the infrastructure that his predecessor had started, Michael Sata, and Zambia was increasingly borrowing more and more.
I think quite rapidly, actually. Like, to be honest, I was seeing roads in places where, to be very honest, I didn't think the roads were that bad and needed that much. Like, you literally see, like, in a neighborhood, like I don't know if this word can be used in Zambia, like a cul-de-sac type of situation. And it's just like, we're going to just, like, fix this road. It was crazy.
Everything was just being rehabilitated. There was a point where I was getting angry. I was like, why does this feel like a war zone? Because of construction sites everywhere and things being broken. So the increasing levels of debt and much of this debt, although of course there's that hysteria, China, of course increasing amounts of debt were to China. In fact, about a third of our debt was to China. But however, much of the debt, the majority of the debt was from private creditors known as the Paris Club, as well as some from the IMF as well. So the debt ballooned basically, and it was also side by side with
some of that
Yeah,
debt,
go ahead.
what I was going to say is, unfortunately, that most of that debt didn't go into productive areas, if I'm not mistaken. I feel like a lot of it went into maintaining the state, and then also, I think the military. I believe you sent me a link once where I looked at
Yeah.
how much money from the Chinese debt and where it was spent in Zambia, and quite a lot of it actually went to the military, and unfortunately, very little of that went into agriculture as was promised by many other
Definitely in
governments. Yeah.
agriculture, yeah. Yeah, definitely agree. Funny enough, the government, Lungu's government was hyping agriculture a lot.
Every
You know,
government hypes agriculture.
yeah, maybe I just became more aware then, but they were
Yeah,
hyping it so much.
yeah,
Like, you know, when the mines were cutting jobs because the copper prices were going down and, you know, that boom
yeah,
wasn't there anymore. They were like, oh, you guys should now become farmers. You know, young people should now do
yeah,
farming. And Lungu
yeah,
decided to open a fish pond in his state house and started, like, as an example, like fish
yeah.
farming. Fish farming is not even that cheap, by the way. But anyway,
True.
but Lungu, I think some things I can say in terms of infrastructure were these sort of fertilize no, not fertilizer, sorry, the those things, what are those machines you use to make maize, like, and maize
Oh,
meal?
chiga. Yeah, maize meal. Sorry, I was about to say Zambian
Yeah,
word, chiga. Yeah,
chigayo. Yeah, I mean, I guess, oh, I don't know the English word for it, but like
yeah.
uh a milling
Maize
thing.
meal. Maize meal.
Yeah,
Yeah,
maize meal is the raw, is it raw? Yeah,
yeah.
maize meal is what you use to make shima, which is Zambia's the main part of
Well,
Zambia's
you
national
use
dish.
a maize miller to grind
Yeah.
maize into maize powder, which is then typically used for nshima. Yes.
Yeah, so that's so small things like that with solar power were featuring in many parts of the country, especially in rural areas.
Yes.
Um,
I actually got to
so
see
and
one
it had,
firsthand.
yeah. So and I don't know if that was so, but that was sort of flagged as the presidential initiative fund or something like that. But a lot of these things was being seen, and then also, as you said, infrastructure. There was a link Zambia 2000 or something. So basically, 2,000 kilometers of road was supposed to be done. There was a Lusaka decongestion project. By the way, Lusaka decongestion project was conceptualized by Mwanawasa, which was president in the 2000s, but it was implemented in sort of like really super speeded, Lungu's time. So these
Yeah.
were like bridges that could decongest roundabouts and choke point areas with lots of traffic. Now the major features of Lusaka.
Yeah.
That was with cooperation with India, the government of India.
Yeah.
And then China did a lot of the other roads. China did the airports. There was Kenneth Kaunda Terminal 2. Kenneth Kaunda Airport, Zambia's biggest international airport in Lusaka, was a terminal that was built by the British in 1998, 1960s, 1964, 63. And then this new terminal was being built at that time. Although the original groundbreaking was during Sata's time, but Ulungu opened it. And then also a whole new airport in the Copper Belt, which was about $400 million. That was also built by the Chinese. So you have a $360 million airport expansion. Then you have a $400 million brand new airport in the Copper Belt region. And then you also have the Kafue Lower Gorge power station. That's like that's over $1 billion, that project, like a whole new power station. I think it's now the second biggest power station in terms of generating capacity in Zambia that was being built at that time. But what all that meant was ridiculous amounts of debt. So I think the PF came and found debt at around $1 billion. And then when they left, first of all, it was undervalued. When they left in 2021, it was, I think about, did they say 13? Officially, it was around like, it was just increasing every year, like
Yeah.
9, 10, 13.
But then also it was difficult to get
13
accurate
billion. And
numbers.
Zambia's GDP, yeah, sorry?
I was saying
No,
it was
not
also
13, not 13, sorry. That's
Yeah.
China's portion. 13 billion was China's portion. Zambia's was like 30 something billion.
Right.
So it was 116% of the GDP. So more than the GDP production was the debt. So
No, I was
the
going
debt-
to say it was at that time it was also very difficult to get accurate numbers as well. So
Yeah, because
Yeah.
the foreign ministry was accused of and like hiding the true figure. There's not foreign ministry, the finance ministry was accused of hiding the true value. So anyway, so there's massive infrastructure going on everywhere.
I don't know if I could mention this here, but I believe I could be wrong, but I believe there was so in Zambia's agriculture system, there's a subsidy program
E-voucher
that does
system.
exist. So yeah, Lungu's government was responsible, if I'm not mistaken, for the e-voucher system, which was quite, now this word carefully, revolutionary, albeit with its own issues and problems and things like that. But it was a great. I believe. Yeah, so essentially in Zambia we are a very maize bias country. So a lot of our diet is in Shima. So a lot of maize are dependent. A lot of people produce maize, and many of the subsidy programs that had existed were there essentially to ensure that the price of maize doesn't increase. So you're essentially giving money to farmers to produce maize. Now this hasn't produced the outcomes that we wanted, in the sense that not many farmers have been lifted out of poverty. You still have all these challenges. So the idea, since I believe Rupiah Banda, I could be wrong, but since Rupiah Banda's time has been to sort of diversify, because
As in the late 2000s, yeah.
Yes, so a lot of people, produce maize, and whenever there's a drought, which are quite frequent in Zambia, actually, somebody once said that every 10 years,
every 4 years,
yeah, 5 years actually. So every time after during an election year, there's going to be a drought in Zambia. Some droughts are not as intense; others are very intense, like the last one we had. So people have been sort of pushing for this diversification to sort of act as like hedging with regards to in agriculture sense. However, so the e-voucher system sort of gave autonomy was an attempt to give some sort of I don't know if autonomy is the correct word, but agency to the farmer, in the sense that before, the government gave you the seed, the seed and all the inputs that you require to farm, and you simply have to do the job and wait for the rains and everything like that. Well, not simply, of course, it's a very difficult job. They would give you a card, and you would pay a certain amount of money, and the government would add on top of that amount of money some amount of money into the card. Like, it's very weird to explain. So you would pay, like, say 500, and then the government would come and give you like 10,000 kwacha, just giving random figures, arbitrary figures. Yes. So and I hope I'm not eating too much time. So that was a way to give agency to the farmers, and so the farmer would go to selected stores which are part of the program, and they would use that card to buy inputs and whatever inputs they want, and whichever things that they want. Now it was a very revolutionary thing. Very famous quote from one of my movies called Fury. It says, "Ideals are peaceful, but war is violent." And for me, it sort of means that you can sort of create these ideas, and but once the rubber meets the road, it becomes very tough. So while it is a very, very plausible.
I read somewhere that there was a study that was done in the pilot phase of the e-voucher system, and there's a village, a very remote village in Zambia. They didn't want to use it because they was it 6% of the sort of people that were on the system didn't like it because they thought it was satanic.
That's actually, I think I've also read that as well. So there was a lot of issues with, like, education, technology, that sort of a thing. Also network problems, because certain areas didn't have, like, proper internet. Then on top of that, like, with Zambia's agriculture system, even though there is an elephant in the many elephants in the room, to be very honest, but one of them is definitely corruption and all sorts of and so when you create a system that actually is good, it becomes inefficient because you haven't really dealt with all the other things that are lingering around. So Just wanted to mention that. And also, I don't know if I can say, sorry to take a lot of time from you, Zenke, but
Yeah.
you had mentioned these maize mill programs that exist in so
The plants,
another,
mini
yeah,
plants.
yeah. Again, another great idea that was put in by Lungu, because I think they were solar powered. However, I actually
Yeah.
did go and visit a few in Chongwe district.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I don't know, but when I was there, it actually was running, and the situation was simply because that it broke down, and apparently the locals aren't allowed to fix it, and that was the end of it. So it's basically just there.
Yikes.
Whereas
Yeah.
others are actually, I've heard others are a bit more functional. So I think he
Right.
tried to do some. He did try to implement some very innovative ideas. However, I think in Zambia, it's just a message to say that there's still, before implementing these things, there's still a lot to uncover for them to be
Sort of
successful.
plan.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, but I mean that's a very good insight. The fact that you actually visited it, you've got direct experience. I think agriculture is a very huge thing, but a country like Zambia is so addicted to copper that agriculture is often a hard sell. Like our parents, generation, many of them, their experience is like in copper belt, and I was like, what the hell is happening in the copper belt? You know, but apparently that was where the jobs were, like the
yeah,
mining sector. That's where the jobs were. All their memories, like, they're nostalgic of the copper belt. Right?
yeah,
Lusaka being a big thing is like what, 25 years old, maybe, in terms of like
yeah,
people populating Lusaka, and Lusaka being like where everything happens is not very old. People that grew up before us, many of their memories is copper belt, because that's where the jobs were. And I think
yeah.
as Zambia has gone through sort of ups and downs of this copper production, you see more people now starting to talk about agriculture, having like a plot, we have heard about those stories all the time.
The classic,
But
what's it called? Classic Zambian retirement plan, as I like to call
Zambian
it.
retirement plan,
Yeah,
house in the city, maybe a small little plot, do some maize.
yeah,
Yeah, but yeah. Anyway, so Lungu did some good things as we saw, but the implementation was a bit difficult. And I think another factor that Nathan has mentioned, which is sort of like a positive spin, is also which I think is quite underrated, the National Health Institute. What's the full name again? The
Nima,
NIMA.
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 Yeah.
NIMA stands for the National Health Institute Management Authority. It's basically the authority that's in charge of the national health insurance. So NIMA had been started quite some time, like it was conceptualized some time back, but Lungu implemented it in 2018 as an act of parliament and was enforced. So there's numerous hospitals all over Zambia where, as long as you're employed, you can get subsidized healthcare, which is health insurance, compulsory health insurance. So when you get a job, you have to have that, So it's sort of like, for those who are listening, in the UK, they have the National Health Scheme, I think. Yeah. National Health Scheme, NHS, which is like, how Americans are obsessed with the military, like, oh, don't touch our military. In the UK, it's the National Health Service,
Yeah.
Health Service,
Yeah.
Health Scheme, Health Service, one of the two. NHS, yeah. Like those guys are like almost untouchable. Like, if the Prime Minister says we're going to cut the salaries of NHS nurses or doctors, you probably lose the election. In the US, if the president says that about the military, then they'll go through some
Yeah.
issues. Yeah. So Zambia, Edgar Lungu basically presided over this as an act of parliament, and I think that's one of the big tangible things that everyone who has some kind of job, and there's the problem as well, because now it means informal sector, those who are not employed also lack health insurance. So that's another problem. But it's a step forward, I think. But the problem with Lungu's presidency was also inability to arrest his supporters, who often had some violent tendencies, especially
Yeah.
against those that spoke ill of him. And it really gave them a very bad
Yeah.
image. And also there's some levels of police brutality or just unprofessionalness especially
Very
when it came to
unprofessional. Yeah.
opponents. There was a girl that was, I don't know if it was a stray bullet, Mapenzi Chivulo. She was shot, a UPND supporter at a rally, and that was huge news. And in Zambian elections are normally not very violent. Zambian politics is normally not really violent, and so any type of violence, especially a death, for politics is a big deal, and it really dented his image. So I think we've covered quite a lot on Lungu's legacy, but COVID-19 came, by the way. He was Zambia's president at the time of COVID-19, and COVID-19 was just basically the nail in the coffin, right? Zambia's economy started contracting massively. The copper prices in that period of time, 2018, 2020, the value of the kwacha depreciated by over 50%. Inflation was increasing. Foreign reserves reduced from almost like 4 months down to like 1 month import cover. So foreign reserves is basically like if the country shuts down, like everything goes, like how much money do you have in your safe? So to import stuff. That's why it's called the import cover. So you have massive levels of borrowing. Now you have COVID, right? So now you have no money and you have debt. Then Zambia in 2020 November became the first country to default on its debt. And
is it post-COVID?
In COVID, it's first African country in COVID.
In COVID, that's what I meant to
say. In COVID to default, right? So that's another problem. But then also the politics, as I mentioned, repression. In 2017, the year after the election, the sort of general election. So this was the second election. Lungu was re-elected with another slim margin, but this time there's a new constitution. Lungu, that's probably one of Lungu's big achievements, not a new constitution in whole, but massive amendments. So the clause that they had for Guy Scott, which barred people from becoming president if both your parents were not born in Zambia, was removed. Now you can be president of Zambia so long as you are born in Zambia or you have descendants from Zambia, right? So several things were changed. Deputy ministers were also removed. Zambia doesn't have a provision for deputy ministers, so reducing the bloated cabinet. There was a referendum that they tried to push through to change the Bill of Rights as well, but the opposition managed to campaign against it. I don't know the merits and the demerits of that one, but there was a lot of mistrust over that referendum. So Lungu wins in 2016 under a new constitution this time. So both the president and the vice president have the same qualifications, and they also voted for as one ticket. Previously, it was just the president, and then the president appoints a vice president. And then also there's a new clause, 50% plus one. 50% plus one basically means you need more than 50% of the votes to win a presidential election. So Lungu becomes president in 2016. And then 2017, there is an incident on the road in Mongu, Western Zambia. And the opposition leader at that time, Hakainde Hichilema, who is still a strong opposition, second rematch against Edgar Lungu. And Mongu is predominantly a UPND stronghold. Yep. So they basically are confronting each other on the road, right? And it's a very dramatic video. And you have a situation where
I think
it looks quite dramatic.
I mean, I think both of them just really needed to
it was.
chill
I
out
mean,
a little bit.
And then so the next day, then you hear PF stalwarts all taunting the police to arrest this opposition leader.
Wait, can you explain what happened? Can I explain what happened in the video?
Yeah, you can go ahead and explain.
So basically, there is a very wonderful traditional ceremony of the Lozi speaking people that takes place in Western Province, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, called the Zenge. Maybe you can help me out here. Kuomboka ceremony. There we go. So the Kuomboka ceremony is a very, very amazing thing. Anybody that's listening to this, I encourage you to look it up on YouTube. It looks really fun. I really wish I could go and visit. But essentially, I believe both President Hakainde Hichilema, now President Hakainde Hichilema, and then President Edgar Lungu were leaving the event. Of course, as you can imagine, both of them have motorcades, and the road that goes there isn't as as it does. What could I say? It's a very small, narrow road. Potholes, and maybe now it's better, but at the time it didn't look as good. So it's a very narrow road, and usually this is now where people kind of disagree, but normally, yeah. So essentially, when a president is coming through, you'd have to give way. And I think the Hakainde Hichilema motorcade did give way, but I think it wasn't like immediate or something. I don't know, like whatever. But and whilst so on both motorcades, there are like people on the sides of the cars riding on the sides, sort of acting like security, that type of a thing. And of course, both parties are insulting each other, exchanging words, because I don't know what they said, so I won't say insulting each other, but
taunting each other,
taunting each other, that sort of a thing. And that was it, right? It kind of just looked like this dramatic, Fast and Furious sort of sort of a scene, Zambia edition, sort of a scene, and people didn't really think about it. Even for me, when I first saw it, I was just kind of like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And then the next, I think, day or days, there was a newspaper that
because it happened on the weekend.
Yeah, the newspaper came out and said Hakainde Hichilema in hot soup, and I was like, huh, like, okay, that's kind of weird. And then next thing we hear, Hakainde Hichilema was either being summoned or was actually arrested.
What happened basically was the Deputy Secretary General of the PF at that time, Mumbipiri, she made on the sort of like a side impromptu interview with ZNBC, and she basically was taunting the police, the Inspector General of the police, basically the head of the police in Zambia, to arrest Hakainde Hichilema, and basically saying he's trying to kill the president. That was the sort of narrative that was building, right? So she was. Many people increasingly, especially pro-Lungu people, were trying to start saying that, okay, this guy is trying to kill the president. How dare you ride on the same road as Edgar Lungu? This is the president of Zambia. You're just an opposition leader. And at the same time, by the way, the UPND did not feel that Lungu was the rightful president because they felt the election was rigged. Okay? 2016 election was rigged. That's what they felt. So you have that, people that don't really believe Lungu fairly won. And then you have people that feel Lungu is the president and you shouldn't disrespect him because of driving and so on. So what ended up, being maybe like a traffic offense became treason. He was charged with treason after there was a massive raid at his new mansion in Lusaka. And basically it was gassed. They beat up a few people. They smoked the rooms. I think someone had an asthma attack, one of HH's relatives, his wife or his kids, I don't know. And basically it became an international problem now. And people were also rebelling. And this mysterious level of fires all over the country were happening, burning some electricity lines, markets. So Lungu decided, after HS was in treason now, he was in prison. Yeah. It wasn't, the trial hadn't begun, but he was already in prison. Maximum facility.
The worst prison in Zambia.
Yeah, where you send people on death row. So HH was criminal number one. And he was there for about 4 months, from April up to August, I think, or July. And so it caught international attention. And then in the midst of that, Lungu decided to declare a state of threatened emergency. It's not quite a state of emergency, but it's threatened emergency. It's emergency. It's a state of emergency in everything but name, almost, which means you have sort of rights to search, seizure without warrants or anything like that. And so it was becoming increasingly polarized. And so it was resolved only through international mediation. The Commonwealth Secretary General at that time came, Patricia Scotland, Olusegun Obasanjo, former president of Nigeria, Jacob Zuma, president of South Africa at that time, came to mediate and sort of visit HH and visit Lungu. And eventually HH was released, but the lines were drawn now. There was no turning back, right? It was clear that these guys are enemies. And HH was arrested several other times after that. So anyway, that was Lungu's sort of second term, I think, in a nutshell, if we can say so. Lots of infrastructure bad decline in copper prices, decline in droughts, electricity, but at the same time also advancements in comprehensively changing the constitution, national healthcare changes, agricultural attempts at changes in the agricultural sort of financing system,
Infrastructure.
Infrastructure, massive infrastructure, to the point that, if you're in Zambia, if you left Zambia before 2015 and came after 2015, you'd be really shocked by the very airport you sit in.
Yeah.
And also the narrative about China.
I was shocked, man. I was like, wow.
Then the narrative of Zambia being a colony of China, I really don't like it. I think, it's removing the agency of Zambia. But, a lot of the stuff, a lot of that stuff obviously is real. I mean, Zambia became more difficult for Zambian government to go against things that Chinese did. I remember there was a time when there was a Chinese and black Zambian couple, and they were refused to be served at a Chinese restaurant because they didn't want the boyfriend to come in, the black Zambian boyfriend. And then there's another incident where the Chinese barbers were not serving Zambians, and so the mayor of Lusaka came and took away their licenses, and then the minister of local government intervened and gave them back their licenses. So, and I did that in my dissertation, you could see a correlation between Zambia being able to push back against China reducing, as well as the debt increasing. So it increased debt. It became more difficult for Zambia to flex against China, but it became Zambia became more able to flex against the West. So Lungu didn't attend the Commonwealth, quite a lot of the Commonwealth conferences. Lungu also told the IMF to go. There was a collapse in discussions.
That the very famous
the IMF. And when Lungu went to the United States, by the way, when Lungu went to the United States, he was honestly, there was a point where and I think this is also another wider thing, the way US treats African leaders and Chinese leaders. China knows how to stroke the ego of Africa in a way that it looks like it's respecting Africa, but it's also stroking the ego of their leaders, right? When you have an African president go to China, right, to visit the president of China, they will bring I don't know how many hundreds of children waving flags at you. There will be a whole convoy. There will be a parade. It would be like almost this African country is on par with China. When an African leader goes to America, you will not even find the president waiting for you at the airport, right? If you are lucky to even meet the president in the first place, I don't know. Maybe you meet the vice president. And I remember Lungu went to the US. He said, Lungu is meeting with US officials. Lungu met the deputy assistant for African affairs. Do you know what that is? That's not the president. That's not the vice president. That's not the speaker. That's not the the Committee of Foreign Affairs in the Congress. That's not even the foreign affairs minister. That's not the deputy foreign affairs minister. That's not the African assistant. That's the deputy assistant to that unit. That is, and you're meeting a whole president of a country, right? It's like telling Donald Trump to meet one of the sort of mid-level staffers in the foreign ministry in Zambia, right? So it just shows you the importance of you. And maybe a few of the select friends of America will meet the president, or if they're lucky, the vice president, as Zambia did when HH became president, when he met Kamala Harris, and Kamala Harris visited Zambia. But anyway, so Lungu's presidency had all of those things going on. And in 2021, Lungu was riding on the wave of construction, even in 2026, actually. The Sonta slogan, basically point at where you have worked, basically teasing his opponents and telling them, okay, you talk a lot, but look at what I've done, and that was his policy. That was his campaign slogan. And there was also obviously wonderful songs that came out those days. But I think there was levels of increased violence from his opponents. There was a famous killing of 2 people when HH was going to police questioning. A lawyer called Nawa, I think, and another UPND cadre shot, and there was pictures of that blood. And that was within 6 months of the next election. So I think it remained on Zambian people's minds that they associated him with being violent. So a lot of things were happening at that time. COVID, economy, back shocks were also not good. And Lungu was riding on infrastructure, and people just got tired of seeing infrastructure, and you can't afford to do anything. Building big airports that maybe the middle class and not the upper class will probably go through, So on election day, 2 days before election, actually, in August the 11th, August the 12th, he was seen to be like cutting ribbons everywhere. And that's how Lungu's presidency came to an end, and they announced that he lost with 38, he got 38%, and Hakainde Hichilema got 59%. So it was a massive, massive victory for the UPND. So, and then after that, he retired from politics. He resumed in 2023, but in 2020, made an alliance with UKWA, so the United Kwacha Alliance. And then in 2024, he was with the Tonse Alliance. And and the month later, when he was made sort of candidate of the Tonse Alliance, he was disqualified from standing in 2026 because it was considered that his 2015-2016 term was a full term. So, the rest, I guess, there's party wrangles and Lungu positioning himself as the leader despite not being qualified for the election, and eventually dying quite suddenly of throat-related illness, achalasia, in Johannesburg on June the 5th. Yeah, so I mean, in a nutshell, that's what happened to Lungu after presidency. He basically tried to build coalitions and position himself as the main challenger for Hakainde Hichilema and potentially go for a rematch again in 2026, but that never happened because the court basically ruled against it, claiming that the 2015-2016 time was actually a full term. And there's a lot of controversy around that. Because previously in 2018, they took it to court as well as to whether or not Lungu is in his second term. And the court actually ruled in favor of Lungu and said, yes, he can stand in 2021. But then this time they said, no, actually, he can't stand in 2026 because 2015 to 2016, one term. 2016, 2021, one term. Therefore, 2026, no. So now Lungu is just basically an influential figure. Some people still had this strange idea that he would stand in 2026 despite not being allowed to. And then you have various opponents in the Patriotic Front, that the factions of Patriotic Front, in Parliament, you have Robert Chabanga, you have Given Lubinda, who is sort of like the pro-Lungu faction. And then you have Mao Sampa, who people say was used by HH to make their own, to destabilize the PF, but I don't know how true that is. So you have a lot of chaos going on. And then the Tonse Alliance also now has members like the Socialist Party, made by Fred Membe. Fred Membe is a proprietor of one of historically Zambia's biggest media newspapers, The Post, which funny enough, Lungu shut down. And then you have Kevin Wariafube, who's a lawyer, who was the campaign manager for Michael Sata. He wrote the book that made him maybe more famous, called Zambia Must Prosper, and his political party is called Zambia Must Prosper. Then you have so many people out there in the field. There's no time to mention them, but so Lungu dies, and now there's a lot of chaos as to how to be buried, because in Zambia the law, when you retire as president, you get benefits, so houses, you get a secretary, cars, for life, and a salary. When Lungu announced his return to politics in October 2023, they removed all of those things, and the state, his supporters saw it as sort of like persecution, malice, and so. But Lungu's immunity was never removed. Yeah, he's the only former president of Zambia to have lost and not have had his immunity removed. Kaunda's immunity was removed. Rupia Banda's immunity was removed.
Let's go on.
Chiluba's immunity was removed, and Chiluba handed over to the same party, so it's his own party member, Mwanawasa, removed it. So Lungu is the only former president, in Zambian history, alive, a living former president, to have had his immunity sustained. But members around him, like his wife, his son, were prosecuted for things that the corruption agencies called proceeds of crime. So it felt like everyone around him was strangled by the state, and it's one of the reasons that now there's a bit of chaos around Lungu's funeral, because they felt that the state did not appreciate him or honor him in his former, his last years. and now the state wants to have a official funeral. As a former president, you're entitled to official funeral. In Zambia, there's a presidential burial site where we bury all our presidents, and so Lungu is supposed to be buried there. That's the tradition, but there's so much stalemate going on with the family, and it's a lot of chaos, and it's heavily politicized. Trust Zambia to have a politicized funeral, to be honest. It's very. The president has been quite calm. He released a statement and had a moment of silence last week, but with all of these debacle, back and forth party accusations against the state, against President Hichilema, he has been very calm, very quiet. Some people say, "Oh, that's lack of leadership." Others say, "Actually, he's just being very mature. It's the president; he's supposed to be above all of this nonsense." Right now we're shooting this podcast, and we don't know when Lungu's body will arrive in Zambia. The country was actually president.
It's still in South Africa.
Yeah, it's still in South Africa right now. So it's a big question mark, and that's how that's how crazy it's become. So he died in South Africa, in Pretoria. So, what I can say for the future is there's only one time, alliances really rarely work, especially when you have big personalities like Fred Membe. The Tonse Alliance is the main opposition, and Lungu was the main figure, right? And now that he's not there to influence who should be the leader or candidate, the Tonse Alliance will now start fighting. First, members like Fred Membe, Kevin Waliafube, all of these other guys fighting. But then also within the PF, they'll be fighting on who controls the PF itself, the biggest party in the Tonse Alliance, which is supposed to be Zambia's opposition. Mind you, but the Tonse Alliance has fielded candidates, members of parliaments, and they won Petauke, which is a constituency in eastern Zambia. But as for president, that's a gigantic question mark. And, Zambians are increasingly disappointed with the economic performance, although they're still slightly optimistic about the economic performance of Zambia in the future. But currently, Zambians, on the average, are quite disappointed by the current state of the economy. And an opposition party would have taken advantage of that, a strong one. And so going into 2026, if they are unable to sort of form a coalition, a strong one, we don't know what will happen. And it's obviously going to be very easy for Hakainde Hichilema to win because of the absence of a strong opposition.
But I mean, never doubt Zambians, man. I mean, I honestly thought Patriotic Front was going to win the last election, but boy, was I wrong.
No, I had a feeling they'll lose.
But
coalitions in the whole, like UPND had this thing called UPND Alliance, but UPND it was literally called the UPND Alliance.
Yeah, but it was the main party. UPND,
which is my point, right?
Yeah.
Other alliances, Hakainde Hichilema, when he first stood for election as a young 44-year-old guy, was president of the UPND, and they formed an alliance. Mazoka died 6 months before the 2006 elections. No, less than 6 months. He died in May. The elections were in September.
Yeah.
So Mwanawasa just took advantage of the division and the lack of, there's HH, Hakainde Hichilema, Edith Nawakwi of another party, and then someone else. Three big personalities at that time.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's the life, legacy, and aftermath of Zambia's 6th president.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that summary, and thank you for taking the time out, Zengi, for preparing all that information. I think we've got quite a lot of information in this podcast. Thank you for all the listeners that have been listening to this podcast, and thank you so much for all the love and support that you send us our way. It really means a lot, the kind messages, the likes and everything. In case you haven't done so, please be sure to leave us a review on whatever podcast platform you are listening to this to, and as Zenge said, which I was coming to, Zenge, subscribe, and if you're watching this on YouTube, like, share. Here at the Africa for Dummies podcast is, of course, to bring you the unbiased, straight to the details, or should I say straight to the facts information. Be sure to look out for more podcast coming your way. We have the famous Zambian farmer, Mr. Bruno Mwimba, who met Kamala Harris, coming soon, who's going to be discussing about Zambian agriculture and as well as how to become successful as a Zambian farmer, including some of the challenges that you might face. So you don't want to miss that. And also some other really interesting podcasts lined up for this month. So be sure to subscribe to stay tuned. And from me, Zenge, the entire Africa for Dummies team, thank you.
I am an African.